Your leg is broken. It happened this morning. You were running, the ground gave way, and now there is a sound coming out of you that you have never made before. It is 40,000 years ago. There is no doctor. There is no hospital. There is no word in your language for surgery or infection. There is just you on the ground and the people standing over you. So what happens next? Most people, if you ask them, assume they know. You die. Maybe not today, maybe over the next few weeks. Badly. Because that's the story we all absorbed somewhere. Before medicine, people just died, young, of everything, all the time. That story is wrong. Not softened, not exaggerated. Wrong in a specific and interesting way. And the real answer to what happens to your leg is going to end up being the most surprising thing in this video. Let's start with the number everybody knows. Life expectancy in the ancient world was about 30. It's in documentaries, it's in school, and it gets used to explain why ancient people married young and why nobody bothered planning for old age. And the number itself isn't made up. Studies of hunter-gatherer groups put life expectancy at birth somewhere between 21 and 37 years. So on paper, yes, 30. But here's what that number is actually measuring, and it's not what you think. It is an average, and averages get destroyed by what happens at the edges. In these societies, only about 57% of children made it to the age of 15. Roughly a quarter of babies didn't survive their first year. Now do the arithmetic on that. Every single one of those very short lives goes into the average and drags it down hard. So the 30 isn't describing a typical adult. It's describing a population where a huge number of people died as children, and the rest kept going. And here's the part that changes everything. If you survived childhood, your life didn't stop at 30. The most common age of death for adults in these groups is somewhere in the range of 68 to 78. Elderly people were not some strange exception. Grandparents existed. They always existed. I want to be careful here because there's an overcorrection that's just as wrong. Ancient life was genuinely more dangerous. More people died at every age of things that would be nothing to you now. They did not live as long as we do on average. But nobody was collapsing of old age at 30, and the picture of a world with no old people in it is simply false. Which leaves us with a much harder question. If people were routinely reaching 60 and 70 in a world with no medicine at all, then something was keeping them alive. What was it? The obvious answer is herbs. Ancient plant medicine, secret knowledge, the wise woman with the pouch. And there's something real there. But it starts much earlier than you'd guess. Earlier, in fact, than us. So let's go further back than that. Further back than any human. To something you can still walk into a forest and watch happening today. In Tanzania, researchers watched wild chimpanzees fold up rough, bristly leaves and swallow them whole, without chewing. The leaves pass straight through, and the bristles scour parasitic worms off the gut wall on the way. They do it most in the wet season, which is exactly when the worm infections spike. And then there's Rakus. Rakus is a Sumatran orangutan with a serious wound on his face. Researchers watched him find a specific climbing plant, one that local people also use as medicine, chew the leaves into a paste, and apply that paste directly onto the wound. Repeatedly. Only onto the wound. Then he covered it with the chewed leaves. It closed up and healed with no sign of infection. This is not something humans taught anybody. Treating an injury with a plant is older than our species. So when ancient humans reached for a remedy, they weren't inventing anything. They were using something they had already inherited. And they got good at it. In a Spanish cave called El Cidrón, researchers pulled DNA out of the hardened plaque on Neanderthal teeth. One of those individuals was in real trouble. A dental abscess, which is agony, and an intestinal parasite on top of it. And in his plaque, and only in his, they found traces of poplar, which contains the chemical ancestor of aspirin, and traces of a mold called penicillium. Now, this is one individual, and reading intention out of ancient plaque is genuinely difficult. So treat it as a strong hint rather than a proven fact. But it's a hint pointing somewhere remarkable. The sick one had the painkiller and the mold. The healthy ones didn't. Then there's the Iceman. Ötzi, frozen in the Alps for 5,300 years, and probably the most examined body in history. Tied onto leather straps in his kit was birch polypore, a fungus with anti-inflammatory properties. In his gut was whipworm, and on his skin were 61 tattoos, which are not pictures of anything. They're lines and crosses clustered on his ankles, his wrists, his lower back, exactly where his skeleton shows the worst wear. Whether that's treatment or ritual, we can't prove. But he had a parasite, he was carrying a medicine, and the marks are where it hurt. And some of it genuinely works. Honey is the clearest example. It's so concentrated it pulls water straight out of bacteria and kills them. It's acidic, and it slowly releases hydrogen peroxide. That's not folklore, that's chemistry. It shows up in Egyptian medical texts hundreds of times as a wound dressing, and medical honey is on the shelf in hospitals right now. Quick, serious note. None of this is advice. Do not put moss, mold, or anything else you found outdoors into an open wound. Most ancient remedies were useless. Plenty were actively poisonous, and the ones that worked we've since isolated and dosed properly, which is rather the point. So the pharmacy was real, but let's be honest about its size. A handful of things that worked, floating in an ocean of things that didn't. It is nowhere near enough to explain a world full of 60 and 70-year-olds. Something bigger is going on. Because it turns out they weren't only picking plants, they were operating. Archaeologists keep finding skulls from all over the world with holes cut in them. Deliberate, careful holes, scraped or bored through the bone. It's called trepanation, and it isn't rare. Hundreds of examples across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, going back thousands of years. And here is the detail that stops you. The edges of those holes are smooth and rounded. That's bone regrowing. That's healing, which means the patient did not die on the table. At some sites, 70 or 80% of trepan skulls show that healing. Some skulls have several holes at different stages of healing, meaning the same person went through it more than once and agreed to it again. And it goes much further back than that. In a cave in Borneo, a skeleton was found from 31,000 years ago. A child whose left leg had been amputated below the knee. Not crushed, not bitten off. Cut, cleanly, and the bone had grown a smooth, healed cap over the end. That person lived another 6 to 9 years afterwards and was buried with care. Think about what that one skeleton requires. Somebody knew where to cut. Somebody controlled the bleeding in a world with no way to clamp an artery. Somebody kept that wound clean enough for long enough that it didn't kill them. And somebody looked after a child with one leg in a rainforest for the better part of a decade. 31,000 years ago. And do this without flinching for a second. There is no anesthetic. There is nothing to knock you out. Whatever is being done to you, you are awake for it, and other people are holding you down. That is the reality behind every one of those beautifully healed bones. Which brings us back to you and your leg on the ground 40,000 years ago. Here's what a broken femur actually costs. The bone needs somewhere around 2 to 3 months to knit, and longer than that before it carries your weight properly. For that entire time, you cannot forage. You cannot run from anything. You cannot carry water or fetch firewood or keep up when the camp moves on, and camps move. So every single day, for months, somebody else has to bring you food they could have eaten. Somebody has to bring you water. Somebody has to move you and clean you and turn you and sit with you while you're useless and frightened and probably unpleasant to be around. And when the group moves, somebody has to decide to go slower, for you. That's what a healed bone is. A healed bone is a receipt. It is physical proof that someone spent months of their own life keeping you alive. And the archaeology of that is astonishing. Shanidar I, a Neanderthal man. Blind or nearly blind in one eye from a crushing blow to the face. A withered right arm ending in a stump. Severe arthritis. Growths in his ear canals that would have left him profoundly deaf. Every one of those injuries had healed long before he died in his 40s, which was old for a Neanderthal. Exactly how much help he got is still argued about. That he was hurt like that and kept living for years is not. Or Burial 9 at a site called Man Bac in Vietnam, about 4,000 years old. A young man, paralyzed from the neck or chest down since his teens, who survived roughly 10 more years that way. And the detail researchers point to isn't the survival. It's that his skeleton shows no pressure sores and no untreated fractures. Someone was turning him. Someone was cleaning him every day for a decade and doing it well. You may have seen a story going around about this. An anthropologist is asked what the first sign of civilization is and answers, a healed thigh bone. It's a beautiful story, and she almost certainly never said it. But the reason it spread is that the real evidence underneath it is even better, and it's sitting in museum drawers all over the world. Now, I'm not going to leave you with a warm feeling I haven't earned. This world was brutal. Infection killed people who had done everything right. Childbirth killed enormous numbers of women, and the babies with them. Nearly half of all children never reached 15. Care was real. Outcomes very often weren't. For most of what went wrong inside a human body, the honest answer is that they watched, and they waited, and they lost. So what actually changed? Because obviously something did. And it isn't that we invented caring for sick people. Look at the bones. We were already doing that. What we invented was scale and sterility and the ability to make it somebody's whole job. We took the thing our ancestors did on a cave floor and we built a building around it, and we put it on a road, and we called it a hospital. Which means the hospital isn't the invention. The hospital is the packaging. The actual technology, the oldest one we have, is a person deciding not to leave. And that one still hasn't been improved on. Every scan and drug and surgeon in the world is stacked on top of it. So the next time you're properly ill and somebody brings you something to drink and sits on the edge of the bed, notice what's happening. That's 40,000 years old. That's the original medicine, and it's the only one that has never stopped working. I'd like to know what you make of that one. What's the oldest remedy you were given as a kid that turned out to be real? And if this changed how the past looks to you, there's a whole series here doing the same thing to the rest of your everyday life.